This creepy artist has puzzled historians for 140 years. This artwork, titled The Smiling Spider, was created in 1881 by French artist Odilon Redon. To the common eye, this may appear as a representation of an ordinary spider, but if you take a closer look, Redon chooses to hide a humanoid face, barring a sinister smile from beneath the spider's shaggy, unkempt fur. Details like these are what distinguishes Redon's work from ordinary charcoal drawings, making them haunting pieces of surrealist art. But what exactly compelled this artist to produce the gritty and unsettling style of art that he did? To better understand the meaning of his work, we need to look back at the life of Redon and gain more insight into his creative process as an artist. Odilon Redon was born in Bordeaux, France on April 22, 1840, and although he took an interest in the arts during his time at primary school, it wasn't until 25 years later, in 1865, when Redon began to pursue his artistic endeavors full-time. This was due in part to his father, a Louisiana slave trader in the United States, insisting Redon enter a more conventional occupation, such as architecture. However, having failed his entrance exams at Paris's École des Beaux-Arts, Redon resumed his pursuit of traditional arts, with various colleagues he met over the years introducing him to sculpture, painting, and lithography, where he began to solidify himself as a name in the art world. The artistic movements Redon is most associated with are symbolism and surrealism. In fact, historians often regard Redon as one of the pioneers of these art forms, and credit him with indirectly paving the way for future symbolists and surrealists like Salvador Dali and Pablo Picasso. Despite his contributions to the art world, Redon's name unfortunately tends to fall by the wayside amongst most of his other turn-of-the-20th century contemporaries. However, his artistic legacy was undoubtedly profound and revolutionary, but what exactly made it that way? Well, we can certainly gain some insight to this question by observing his body of work. Redon's art began as most classically trained artists do, drawings and paintings with an emphasis on portraiture, still lives, and imagery from religious and literary subjects. However, in 1876, we begin to see a dramatic shift in the overall tone of Redon's work, combining his previous subject matters with disturbingly gross exaggerations of human anatomy, most notably depicting heads and eyeballs of epic, even grotesque proportions. Through his purposeful usage of elements such as high contrast, object scale, and absence of color, Redon is ultimately able to perfect his visual concepts of the nightmares he wanted to convey to his audience. While the motivation for realists and naturalists was to find truths through the portrayal of the natural world through everyday life, symbolists, on the other hand, choose to pursue their truths through the portrayal of the subconscious, the surreal, and the sublime. This philosophy best explains why Redon approached his artistic practice the way he did. In fact, his most iconic period, 20 years worth of charcoal lithographs, which he distinguished as his noirs, were created as a direct result of what he described as submitting to the torments of imagination and the surprises she gave me under my pencil. While artwork depicting fictional and imaginary subjects can be traced as far back as history itself, what made the artists of the avant-garde era so revolutionary were their unorthodox approaches that were new and exhilarating. Up to that point in history, artwork based outside of reality was often limited to religious iconography as a means to strike fear and reverence in individuals and frighten them of vices and sin. However, as demonstrated by the avant-garde artists, the ambiguous nature of their work didn't need a concrete story or a reason to exist, ultimately leaving the interpretation of the piece up to the viewer. And it's this philosophy that has often left art historians puzzled nearly 2 centuries later, as the artist's choice, unwillingness even, not to provide an exact meaning behind their art makes it difficult for historians to identify how an artist's finished piece may correlate to their intended message. Redon was a firm believer of this with his own work, even stating, "My drawings inspire and are not to be defined. They place us, as does music, in the ambiguous realm of the undetermined." The psyche of an artist may be incomprehensible to the average human trying to peek inside, but it doesn't always need to be understood. What should be understood is the artist's unwavering resilience, their ability to push the boundaries of convention regardless of expectations placed upon them by society. Odilon Redon was living proof of this.